Global Accessibility Awareness Day. Ensuring an inclusive and accessible green transition. Webinar, May 15, 2024, 1 o'clock to 2:30 p.m. Central European Summer Time. GreenSCENT logo, ClearClimate logo, Zarxa Access Cat logo, Transmedia Catalonia logo, Accting logo, Rethink Action logo, iChange logo, University of Utrecht logo, GreenTeens logo.
So welcome again to our webinar, Ensuring an Inclusive and Accessible Green Transition, organized as part of the Global Accessibility Awareness Day by several partners, projects, and initiatives. ClearClimate, GreenTeens, Zarxa Access Cat, GreenSCENT, Transmedia Catalonia, Accting, iChange, and Rethink Action. So I want to thank in advance all the partners for their contribution. My name is Chiara Gunella, and I'm in charge of outreach, research, and dissemination at Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona. And today I will be guiding you through this webinar. I have green eyes, light brown hair. My pronouns are she and her. I have a piercing of my right nostril, and today I'm sitting in my studio. Before I give the floor to our speakers, I would like to remind ourselves why we are here, to reflect a bit on why we decided to create this webinar. And I don't want to do it through theories or difficult concepts. I just want to do it through the words, the quotes of different organizations working in the field of the green transition. Let's start with the first quote. Recent environmental campaigns focus on the use of plastic straws as an easy way to eliminate plastic waste. But many people with mobility impairment or chronic pain are unable to drink without the aid of a straw. We need to avoid eco-ableism. What is this quote by the Center for Disability Rights trying to tell us? That when creating projects, initiatives, policies, it is crucial not to have only able-centric perspectives, because these can lead to exclusion and discrimination, like it happens for the case of the straws, that for able bodies are convenience items, but for some people with disability are crucial for their independence. So for a green transition, we need to have at the discussion table diverse collectives. Going to the second quote by the Center for Biodiversity and Indigenous Knowledge, women produce 60 to 80% of the food in developing countries. I know developing countries is a crucial and challenging term that we can decide to analyze later. As climate change intensifies resource scarcity, women and girls may have to travel further to collect water and firewood, increasing threats to their safety, decreasing productivity in areas like farming, and reducing time available for schooling. So what is this quote trying to tell us? That the climate crisis is not gender neutral. Recognizing how climate change affects collectives in different ways can lead to more tailored solutions that are not just green, but are also socially just. I'm going to the third quote by Nonette Royo, Senior Facility Representative, an organization working for Indigenous rights. How do we protect something we don't see ourselves as part of? The climate crisis is eating crisis, but also a crisis of lifestyle. Humankind relationship with nature is in crisis due to a loss of respect for it and connection to nature. Indigenous knowledge can help us to return to the wisdom of our ancestors to survive and overcome the climate crisis. So this quote reminds us how much we can learn, but also unlearn from spaces of co-creation and dialogue with diverse groups. For instance, for example, indigenous knowledge systems, which are really diverse because indigenous communities are different, often exoticized by Western society, view the land as sacred and not to be polluted, clearly in different ways. But despite being responsible for preserving 80% of our biodiversity, indigenous community are often excluded from climate discussion. So this quote is an invite to foster spaces that bring different kinds of knowledge together, recognizing that there is much we can learn and again, unlearn from each other. So going back to the first question, why are we here today? Because we want to do as well a transition. We want to go from a green transition to a just one that consider different needs, knowledges, ages, genders, bodies, and cultures. And we will do thanks to the experiences, projects, and ideas, solutions of our speakers, starting with Sarah McDonough from the GreenSCENT project that will present accessibility meets sustainability bridging the gap. Afterwards, Pilar Orero from ClearClimate project will present clear communication for all, and especially for vulnerable groups. Katerina Dor from iChange and Rethink Action project will present accessibility in visual communication. Sophia Street from Accting project will present for an inclusive and socially just European Green Deal, integrating gender and intersectional perspective in Green Deal policies. And finally, Dana Spitzer from GreenTeens project will present using motive alignment to engage youth in pro-environmental behavior across cultures. And in the end, we will have 10 minutes for a Q&A session. So that, I welcome all of you again to this webinar where we will try to explore how we can include different perspectives in considering a just transition. And I will give the floor to Sarah McDonough for the first presentation. Thank you, Sarah. I will stop sharing the screen.
Thank you, Chiara. And hello to everyone who's joining us today. I'll just try and share my screen. Let me know if you can see it okay. Oh, hang on. Share. There we go. Can you see that?
We can see it.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone on the webinar today. So as Chiara said, my name is Sarah McDonough, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona, where I work in the GreenSCENT project. And my talk today really is going to explore the connections that between sustainability and accessibility, two very important concepts in society today, and ones that we have examined and researched at UAB as part of our work on the GreenSCENT project. But before I do that, I'd just like to self-describe myself. So I'm a 32-year-old woman with long brown hair. My hair is currently down and I'm wearing gold earrings and a black jumper. My eyes are brown, and yeah, I'm also have quite pale owing to the fact that I'm from Ireland, so we don't get a lot of sunshine. So I'm just going to move on to the next slide now. Okay, so when we think about sustainability and accessibility, we normally view them as distinct concepts. So accessibility, for example, that refers to something that's easy to use for a diverse range of people, and that includes people with disabilities. And that's going to be the focus of what I'm going to talk about today. So this really applies to the design of things like physical spaces, like buildings, as well as digital spaces like the internet, websites, applications, for example. On the other hand, then sustainability is a very broad concept. In terms of definitions for sustainability, we can draw on the UN Brundtland Commission's definition from 1987. Which they say that it's the ability to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So the bridge between these two seemingly distinct concepts then is the actual idea of inclusivity. So thinking about how we can include everyone, including people with disabilities. Now, when we think about the number of people in the world with disability, according to figures from the World Health Organization, there's an estimated 15% of the global population has a disability. In terms of the current climate crisis, according to researchers Hemingway and Priestley, people with disabilities are disproportionately vulnerable to natural hazards, primarily as a consequence of social disadvantage, poverty, and structural exclusion. Now, what Hemingway and Priestley are saying here is not that people with disabilities are inherently vulnerable to natural disasters because of their disabilities, but rather that their vulnerability is the product of a society that routinely ignores their needs and their concerns. So if we think about some of the specific concerns of people with disabilities, what are they? So first and foremost, really access to information in alternative formats. A lot of the time, these are not available. So for example, in sign language or Braille, information can also be presented in complex language that might be difficult to understand. And of course, this is something that Professor Pilar Herrero will touch on in her presentation in more detail. Next, there's the issue of access to emergency evacuation facilities and transport. So when we think about things like natural disasters like floods or tsunamis, we think about how we can evacuate people. And oftentimes the facilities for evacuations, they're not actually accessible to people with, for example, reduced mobility. Finally, then we have kind of broader issues in terms of attitudinal barriers, whereby people with disabilities are often excluded from decision-making and also discussions around climate and climate planning, climate mitigation planning, as well as emergency preparedness. For example, only recently people with disabilities have been actually included in sessions in COP, which is the Conference of the Parties that look at how we can reduce our global carbon emissions by 2050. So some examples, if we look at past examples then of natural disasters, we can see that people with disabilities were disproportionately affected. So research conducted by the National Council on Disability in the United States, they found that people with disabilities were disproportionately affected by both hurricanes. These are Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, because their needs were overlooked. So this meant that they were often unable to evacuate because of transportation and evacuation shelters being inaccessible to them. The report also found that people with visual and hearing disabilities were unable to access important safety information because it was all unavailable in alternative formats. So without access to this safety information, the lives of these people were put at risk. Okay, so not only do we have a moral obligation to protect the lives of people with disabilities in the current context of the climate crisis, we also have a legal obligation under the terms of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and also under the Paris Agreement, both of which mention the importance of upholding their rights. So in terms of accessibility, where does it fit into the wider sustainability agenda? So we've seen the publication of the UN's 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. While accessibility isn't explicitly mentioned as a single goal within those development goals, it is referenced, and the principle of leaving no one behind is central to this agenda. Disability itself is mentioned 11 times across various goals. However, more specifically, goals 4, which is quality education, 10, which is reduced inequality, and 11, sustainable cities and communities, they do mention the importance of inclusion and accessibility for persons with disabilities. This is also underscored by Antonio Gutierrez, who was the then Secretary General of the United Nations, in which he said, I quote, "The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is the world's globally agreed plan for peace and prosperity for all on a healthy planet. But this vision of a better future can only be achieved with the full participation of everyone, including persons with disabilities. Upholding the rights and ensuring the full inclusion of the world's billion persons with disabilities is not only a moral imperative, but also a practical necessity." So, however, in reality, we're really far from achieving true inclusion for people with disabilities when we think about national climate policy. So according to a joint report on disability inclusion in national climate commitments and policies by the McGill Centre for Human Rights in Canada and the International Disability Alliance, we find that they're quoted as saying most references to disability and people with health conditions or chronic illnesses in states' climate adaptation policies are cursory in nature. So in many policies, persons with disabilities are listed among other groups, especially vulnerable to climate change impacts, but without further details as to the measures that should be taken to ensure the inclusivity of adaptation measures. So without concrete measures in place that are specifically tailored to the specific needs of people with disabilities, this leaves them dangerously exposed as extreme weather events intensify. So where can we really go from here? So in order to meet the needs of people with disabilities in the current climate crisis, we need to look at what actionable steps that we can take to safeguard their rights. And this includes their right to access important information. We also need to think about if and how current adaptation planning addresses the needs of people with disabilities. And tied to this is the question of how we can incorporate their valuable insights, people with disabilities insights into climate adaptation planning. Finally, then, and more broadly speaking, how can we bring the concepts of sustainability and accessibility together more holistically? So how can we think about these two concepts together? And with that in mind, then, I'd like to invite those of you here today to our upcoming conference. It's called the Green Digital Accessibility Conference, and it will take place in Barcelona and also online. And we will really explore these questions, among others. And I think the link to the conference will be posted in the chat. This conference really is the product of the work that we do here at UAB, and we look at the intersections between accessibility, sustainability, and technology. And some very interesting insights have already emerged from this conference, which gathers together researchers as well as practitioners and professionals across diverse fields, all looking at accessibility and sustainability in a more holistic way. And we really hope that you'll consider joining this year's conference, which will take place from the 2nd to the 3rd of December. And if you would be interested in proposing a paper or a workshop, the deadline for that is the 31st of May. So there's still time. And if you have any questions about that, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll just finish here with my contact details, and thank you so much for your attention. And I'm just going to pass it back to Chiara now. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for your presentation and for making us reflect on how we can bridge the gap between accessibility and sustainability. And I hope to have some of the people that are here today to the upcoming conference, Green Digital Accessibility 2024. And now I will give the floor to Pilar Herrero for her presentation, Clear Communication for All, and especially for vulnerable groups. Thank you, Pilar.
Thank you, Chiara. I hope I am sharing my presentation.
You are.
I am? Fantastic. Good morning. My name is Pilar Herrero. I work at Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona. I am almost 65 years of age. I have short grey hair. I'm wearing plastic round glasses and a stripy jumper. And I am at home today. My presentation is called Clear Communication for All, and especially for vulnerable groups. I am presenting this out of some work that we're doing from the university. One is in the GreenSCENT European project. The other one is on the ClearClimate European project as well. So those two projects are being funded by the European Commission, and we are working on them, on this clear communication. And the other one is related to Access Cat, again, a network, a national network, Catalan network, where we're also working on these issues. And I would like to thank Chiara for organizing this, because I know how long it takes, but it is very well organized, so thank you very much. Why I'm talking about clear communication for all. The idea is that we communicate, for example, what Sarah was saying just a minute ago, when we have to raise awareness of the issues to do with emergencies, for example, the cases that she clearly put forward, the example that she put forward, that people with disabilities are disproportionately challenged when there is any alert to do with a weather problem. Mostly is to do that people are not, I mean, the governments communicate with citizens, but they don't know how to communicate effectively, and this communication to be very clear. I don't know in your countries if you had recently some tests. Most European governments had to do tests for these events. And in the ones in Catalonia, they were very funny, because we all got a very long message in our phones. And it was so long that it was almost impossible to read. So by the time you read this message, and if there is an earthquake, for example, or whatever, it would be too late. So basically, nobody thought on how to effectively and clearly communicate the issue to the citizens. So I hope the Catalan government is taking care of that, because definitely there is an issue there. Also, I would like to try to raise the issue here that who is the target group that we need to do the clear communication to. And to me, it's everyone, all of us, because all of us at different moments and at different with different context, we are different personalities, and also we have different traits. So we don't behave in the same way if we are relaxed and or if we are nervous, for example. So that we change the way we behave according to the context that we are in. So to me, all of us we are vulnerable at one point or another. And I found these different definitions of who is vulnerable people, and I will read it because this presentation is an accessible presentation. So who is vulnerable is people who have a loss of everyday routine, a threat to personal safety, a lack of resources, risk of exploitation of personal safety, inadequate support, discrimination, stigmatization, risk of displacement, and deprivation from the basic needs. So there is this classification of who is a vulnerable person is not to do with their abilities or with disabilities, is to do with different markers, different, and I think it gives rise to all of us to be part of vulnerable groups at one point or another. So the idea basically is to do a profile for all of us, not just for people with disabilities, but for everyone. Why clear communication? Clear communication because the idea is that we communicate whatever we want to communicate as fast and efficient as possible. And it is clear, and today more than any other day, that's what people want to communicate. It is very clear in your head, but it doesn't go across very clearly for many reasons. And for many reasons, it could be because of the use of easy language. There is a lot of work going on easy to read, easy language, plain language. There is the terminology is not clear on what is easy language, but the idea is that the vocabulary it's a simplified vocabulary, that the syntax it's also easy syntax. So there is already an agreed concept of what is easy language or easy communication. But not only the content of the communication has to be accessible and clear. Also, there has to be no misunderstandings. So when you say it doesn't lead you to something else. Also, there should be a building of trust and rapport. So whatever someone is communicating, you trust them that what the communication it is right. So because of so many fakes and so many problems, so that it is engaging. So you are communicating and they are engaging you into the communication, the message that is there. Also, it is to do with active listening. And I like these points are not mine. These points are to do with articles on clear communication. And I like this because it's not only the content of the message that has to be clear, but also the listener, the receiver has got to have an active attitude towards listening and towards understanding what the communication is about. Something that it is basic, and it is utilizing multiple communication channels. This is accessibility. This is when we not only use one, but we use as many as possible, and then the receiver can activate as many as possible. At the moment, this is not, with the technology that we have right now, that is not usually possible. But more and more often, you will find the media players, and then you can activate several different options at the same time. And that is fantastic, because then you are able to get the message with higher or with more services to fit your needs. And one issue that is always I found missing in all the literature that I've been looking at the moment regarding clear communication is to do with the interaction with the digital device. So we had the center of the clear communication, the origin of the clear communication. We had the receiver of the clear communication. We had the clear communication, the message in itself. But what happens when the communication is done through some digital devices? Then the interaction of the human with the digital device also has got to be easily intuitive. It has to be that you can really communicate very fast with the digital devices that you have on. And that's what I think it's important, and that's what I'm focusing in this communication, is how is the human going to interact with the machine? How are humans are going to activate and disactivate these multiple channels that we have for communication. On the screen, we have... Someone is talking. We have on the screen, we have a picture of someone with a finger activating all the different devices, from the shopping trolley to an email, from a screen, from the internet, from some headphones, from the mobile phone, from a document, or from a computer. So in fact, we can receive from all the different devices the communication, and this clear communication that I am really looking forward to. Now, we're working in ITU, UAB, the team that is organizing this event. We are working in the UN agency for communications called ITU, and we are working on trying to draft a standard for something called the Common User Profile. The Common User Profile is independent of a device application. So each person would have a user profile. And the idea would be that you would create a profile, and every time you communicate with the devices would adapt to you, to whatever you have decided that it is your profile. The user profile, a common user profile, is intended to be used through a software agent. So that is the software agent, whatever that is defined as a digital entity that perceives its environment. So it is an active software. And this software would understand the environment that I am in. And then it would adapt the interaction with me, with the digital device. I don't know if I am explaining very well myself, but basically, if I need to read, the digital device would activate the subtitles. And if I am a slow reader, the subtitles will slow down. And if I am a fast reader, it would go to the normal speed, for example. If I can't hear very well, they would activate also some special sounds, but perhaps not all the sounds, only the grave sounds, because I have a problem with this, with hearing, and they would understand the type of hearing issue that I have. If I am a man, and if I am a colorblind person, and there are 4 different types of colorblindness, the device would understand which type of colorblindness I have. So this would create a different interaction and different interface for me to get all the colors properly. So the idea is that the common user profile can be used to create a synthetic profile of me, who I am when I am interacting with the devices. And it can be used to simulate the effect of parameter adjustment on different devices, allowing the developers, and that is the important thing, is that developers who are developing any applications, any services, anything, they are designing any web pages or any web content, that they are aware that they can use they can activate different softwares to generate accessibility for all, without us realizing that all this is being activated. This is the common user profile. So let us think that we want to, my common user profile, for example, what would be my user common profile when I need to do textual interaction? So I am getting some text through my mobile phone, through my computer, through whatever, and I have to read, okay? So what I would do, what I would ask a designer, is to take into consideration all these different items that we have identified here. So when they design something, they can change the character set, the character display size, small, big, medium, the line spacing, okay? So that can also be taken into consideration. The font, the character attribute, the graphics, the character opacity as a percentage from 0 to 100, the foreground color, the background color, so that's the contrast. The standard unit used to describe color, which may be a single color or a gradient. And as we already know now, we shouldn't be using sort of a rainbow because that's terrible, but that's another thing. The background opacity, again, as well. And the language of the text, are we going to use, for example, English, or what language are we using? And also each language, not each language, but there are many languages that are not written in Latin alphabets like this one. So perhaps you read from right to left, left to right, top, bottom, bottom, top. So we have to take into consideration that if we had to subtitle in a different language, the subtitles may not only always come down, they could only come on the side, or you would be reading back. And this is not a trivial issue. For example, we are trying to define at the moment an application to do subtitles in 360 for Arabic. And you would think that reading left to right and right to left is sort of straightforward. It isn't. For to design the editor for the Arabic is taking us a bit. So if we take into consideration all this from the beginning, it would allow us to not have to redesign the editor as we're doing right now when we have a different writing style, like, for example, Arabic. Again, that was just for text as as one of the different variables that we have for interaction. Sound is another one. Haptic is another one. So all the different senses are related with the interaction. So text is one of them, and sight is one of them. Now, if one of the text is subtitles, then we would have to do the time and control of the subtitle. The position of the caption of the subtitle. Where is it going to be? Down here at the top, as I mentioned, left, right. If we are in 360, where are you going to position the subtitle? The variable describing the textual information, and that is from another document that I was working. The position of the subtitle according to the writing system. And finally, the guiding mechanisms when we're talking about immersive environment. So we tell where the subtitle is going to appear. It's going to appear here, or it is going to appear there. So those are the guiding mechanisms. So these are some examples of the document that we are writing at the moment in ITU, in the UN agency. And the idea would be that we have like a list of all the parameters that they have to be taken into consideration when designing any application, any service, any product for interaction with users towards clear communication and clear communication for all. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. And Chiara, could you and you have here the hashtag for the Green Forum.
Thank you, Pilar, for showing us that actually we can all be vulnerable, as you said, at certain points. So in planning communication, we should consider that. And also in this project, we are working on making also communication on social media accessible. Climate activism should be accessible for all. So if you are curious to investigate on how to make your communication on social media accessible, please visit our Instagram account. I sent you in the chat our actual campaign. And now from accessibility in subtitles and accessibility as explored by Pilar Orero, we will move to visual accessibility with the presentation of Catarina Dor. The floor is yours, Catarina.
Chiara, you have to stop my sharing. I don't know what.
I stop it.
Thank you.
Oh, hello. I'm trying to share my screen.
We can see the notes. Perfect. Now it's working. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you for the invitation for this event. I'm looking forward, or also enjoying it. So yeah, hello, my name is Catarina Dörr. And before I start, I want to describe myself. I have dark brown hair. My hair is up, and I'm about 30 years old. I have bright skin, and I'm using she, her as pronouns. And I'm wearing at the moment a white shirt with blue patterns. I'm the visual communication designer for the Climate Media Factory in Potsdam, Germany. That's a company focusing on projects that are related to climate action and climate impact research. And here in this position, I'm responsible for the design, all graphical concepts and elements, especially of two Horizon 2020 projects called Rethink Action and iChange. And my presentation will be about accessibility in visual communication. So that's my title. So before I start, I will go shortly through my agenda. First, I will talk a little bit about my general design interest. Then I will tell you or clarify the question, what exactly is visual communication? After that, I will talk about the project Rethink Action, how to start a visual concept. And after that, about the project iChange, how to design for a broad audience. Right now, I show an image of an illustrated red colored globe in front of a yellow surface and a red thermometer. People who suffer the most, like we heard already, from socioeconomic changes brought about by climate change are mainly people who don't have easy access to scientific information. And it is important that they have, so that they have the possibility to make a difference and demand to change. To make that possible, as a designer, I'm interested in the influence of design in society. Sorry. How design influence or even shape human behavior, and which responsibility designers have when they design. This also includes in my work the intersectional analysis of everything that's designed in terms of its effect on people, and with the goal to adapt my results in my own design practice. So I will come to the question now, what exactly is, I have a problem right now with the view, 1 second. Okay, I will try. Yeah, what exactly is visual communication? The easy answer is to make something pretty, but visual communication or communication design is more. It's like a language we learn to speak. Designers learn language, how to communicate content visually and accessible in the best way. So here's a list what designers need to do. So first, when we start a project, we have to clarify what is the project all about. Then we need to know for whom is the project made for. So common categories in our case would be, for example, scientists, decision makers, citizens, and they are all categorized by their gender, age, ethnicity, and their bodies in general, also people with and without disabilities, their class, and so on. But I will come back to these categorizations later. And the next point is, in which kind of mood do we want to communicate in this project? So do we want to have it really scientific? Do we have it more simplified, utopian, dystopian, and so on? The next thing we need to clarify, what images do we use? So what do we want to show, and which representations of people and things do we want to use for that? Also, the style has to be chosen, like photos, graphics, illustrations could be styles we can use. And the last thing we need to clarify is close to the fourth point, which media do we choose to share information and which reaches out our target group? That could be prints like posters, flyers, or also in a digital way, like through social media, and even installations and objects. So what else to know about visual communication? I show you a list right now. Visual communication is in general a helpful tool for accessibility of complex content, because to be able to create images, designers have to reduce complexities to its core messages. The biggest challenges in visual communication are to be visible in the overload of images, we all know it, and to be inclusive as much as possible. The second point is mostly not even tried. So it's good that we do this, discuss that here. Also, it is important to regard to readability and comprehensibility, that graphic elements like icons, for example, have to be clear and reduced, but still easy to understand. And colors with high contrast and good to remember, they have to be placed where it is accessible for everyone. And it's also important that to know that every color, every shape, every context already have a meaning in themselves. But also images are somehow limited. I show right now a person sitting, sleeping in a fridge. Even if images simplify access to certain topics with regard to language, barriers, different levels of education. A title I show here, Can't Sleep During Heat Waves is the title, and a simplified accessible information text is sometimes required to provide more information than is visually possible. I finished this view on visual communication and will talk about the first Horizon 2020 project, Rethink Action. About Rethink Action. I show the Rethink Action logo here, 3 different colored and structured squares and the name. Rethink Action is one of the Horizon 2020 projects in which we promote climate action by developing a data-driven digital platform. The aim is to enable policymakers, stakeholders, and citizens in Europe to make better, valuable information, better decisions for land use-based adaptation mitigation solutions. To afford this, the project will deliver clear and valuable information based on 6 representative case studies, that means regions in Europe, covering the main regional differences related to climate change. To promote active participation in climate action, the platform will allow users access to solutions on local, European, and global scales, just to know the general idea of this project. For this project, I show you how I started the design from scratch with the logo to give you an insight of how I created a visual appearance of a sustainable project that's meant to be for everyone. So how to start a visual concept? First, I got the proposal of many pages, around 100, where I choose the most characteristic words that are listed here to get the core of this project. For example, sustainability, land use, adaptation and mitigation, society, satellites, case studies, driving change, climate action, modular models, and more. Because of the broad audience, I have to be aware to simplify the content as much as possible to make it scientific, but also visually attractive and accessible for everyone without scientific background. So I need to take these words and try to create a logo out of that. Because we use satellite data within Rethink Action for the logo, I chose a square format of the satellite top view on a green field or forest, I show now. Also on a copper colored striped agriculture field, I show now. And on people represented as old pink dots in motion, I show now. For the typeface, we heard something about typefaces already. I decided on the typeface Spira Sans. Because it has many different international characters, that's really rare. It is open source, so everyone can download it pretty easy. And it has clear shapes without decoration, so it's accessible for visually impaired people as well. And also it is scientific, more scientific. For the colors, I decided on a colorful design using nature-based muted colors for the logo I show in the first row, and combine them with pastel colors for the background and to create contrast for illustrations. Also, the colorful design is to make it visually more attractive. I show the horizontal Rethink Action logo now. Because it is about climate action, the whole logo needed to look activated, not grounded yet. That means, I show the final version, the whole logo and many illustrations I did are in a slight rising angle of 12 degrees to give this the visual appearance of action. So this logo was the starting point for a style guide, a website, a roll-up, social media templates, illustrations, and more. I show some of them right now on the screen. So at the end, the whole design will define how easy your project will be received by people and if they understand, accept, or reject it. Because it's the first thing they see. So now I want to introduce you to the iChange project to show how to create accessibility through images for diverse target groups. How to design for a broad audience. I show the blue and green iChange logo and beside an abstract illustration of people, above them icons of transport, food, and energy. iChange is a project that is focused on behavioral change of citizens and the sustainable decisions in their daily routine, how they move in their cities, how they handle their trash, and so on. The project aims at promoting a behavioral change through citizen science initiatives. That means in 8 different cities around Europe, but as well in Israel and Burkina Faso, they are all called living labs. Citizens are called to collect data, for example, of temperature and air pollution, which will provide better information on how to act on climate change. I show an illustration of a diverse group of colorful dressed people with different body shapes. So designers learn what people want to see, to feel, to experience even. So they have a big responsibility. So they have to be sensitive with their surrounding and have to reflect their view on socialization all the time, especially privileged designers. EU projects often appeal to a wide range of people. iChange, for example, is made for citizens, means it includes really every gender, age, class, everybody's bodies, actually, everyone. In society, some of these categorizations have been criticized, but they are still, but they are still used to define target groups, and sometimes we need them. At the same time, in showing people, designers have to be careful not to forget marginalized groups, reproduce prejudices, ignore differences, or create new problematic images while avoiding others, because this can happen really fast. This process needs time for discussions and feedback because we have few positive, inclusive examples in design. So I want to give you 2 examples for those specific challenges. In iChange, we use icons for people, but also food, transport, cities, houses, and nature for animations and images. I will explain what I show. So the first example is food. When I created an icon for food, I created a picture of an arrangement of a Tetra Pak of milk, broccoli, carrots, grain, and an apple. I show now, right now. But as we have living labs in Jerusalem and Ouagadougou, this food and their packages doesn't work for all. I show now the changed one. So after a discussion, I changed the Tetra Pak of milk to a milk jug, the broccoli to corn, and the apple to a bowl of cereals. What would work better for different cities than before? The second example is people. Normally, simple icons of people are mainly shown as female or male, showing with their clothes and walking, but how to show people more diverse, that's the question. The people for iChange, I show here in a city scene with houses and trees behind them, were illustrated with more or less an undefined body shape. They have no exact clothes. Their curves change while they move in animations. Children are involved, old people are included, a person using a wheelchair. And in manner of showing disabilities, it shouldn't be the only version to show a person with disabilities to show a wheelchair, because disabilities are diverse too, and not all are visible. But for example, blind people could be shown with a yellow blindfold or just a cane. I do like here. Also using diverse skin colors is really important for representation of all people. So I finished my presentation with the last example and a more detailed illustration for iChange, where I show the gender challenge a bit closer. So if this illustrated person I show now would have been clearly a woman through wearing a pink dress, using pink really provocative, with long blonde hair and a ponytail, I would reproduce maybe more a picture of a caring housewife or a girl. And this changed person instead I show now could still be a woman, but with the short haircut and the wide shape of the clothing of a jumper and trousers. It could also be a man or a non-binary person. So all of this I showed you are experiments, and I'm still learning to put theory into practice, because that's not really easy, and I also do mistakes. But that's why it's really important to work on it to achieve a just green transition. And I'm really happy to have this invitation, because I also learned while doing this presentation. Thank you for listening, and I will post you some links of iChange and Rethink Action in the chat, so you can have a look on the animations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Katarina, for your presentation and for reminding us the the importance of representation while also challenging our bias. As you said, when we want to represent disability, we generally think about visible disability while the disabilities are also invisible. So thank you for reminding us this aspect. And now I will give the floor to Sofia Street from the Accting project for her presentation for an inclusive and socially just European Green Deal, integrating gendered and intersectional perspectives in Green Deal policies.
Oh, thank you very much. Can you see the correct slides?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So my name is Sofia Strid. I'm the scientific coordinator of Accting, an EU Horizon 2020 project. I am white, middle-aged, middle class. I've got a low vision, and I'm a dyslexic. But today I will talk more about inclusion than accessibility, and I will talk about the Accting project and some of our results in this area. So, as we all know, the European Green Deal aims to improve the well-being and the health of citizens and future generations by achieving efficient use of resources for a circular and clean economy. However, we also know that there are multiple gendered and intersectional inequalities that emerge in the context of policy and other interventions in the Green Deal area. So Accting mobilizes research and innovation and experiments to promote an inclusive and socially just European Green Deal. And we're focusing on the complex and intersecting inequalities produced by the Green Deal policies.
We can't see the next slide. I think you're blocked.
In 34 countries and within our consortium consisting of 13 European partners. The project is coordinated by the European Science Foundation in Strasbourg, and it runs from 2022 to 2025. We have 3 overall objectives with our project. The first one is to understand the impact of Green Deal policy initiatives on both individual and collective behaviors from a gender plus intersectional perspective for behavioral change. The second objective is to co-create, design and implement solutions that can reduce or prevent policy-related inequalities, and these solutions are to be deployed by policymakers and stakeholders. The third objective is to empower policymakers to anticipate and mitigate the potential negative impacts on policies on inequalities. The conceptual framework that we've been working on or with in Accting consists of 3 important perspectives. The first is the vulnerability perspective, which foregrounds how those affected by Green Deal policies are segmented and socially stratified by multidimensional sets of risk factors. And we draw on different classifications of vulnerability factors. The second perspective is the identification of vulnerable groups, not just as victims, but as key agents of transformative change. So social groups and communities which are more exposed to the diversified and often cumulated risks of being damaged by climate change are also in turn, and they are very often actually, among the key actors to manage climate transition, particularly when they form groups and networks to collectively address the issues they face. And the third perspective that we've been working on with Accting is the gender plus intersectional perspective. And this considers how multiple intersections of risk factors and active engagement and the related complexity and power dynamics that underlie behavioral, social and cultural change, how they in turn underline and make visible the pervasive power dynamics that affect behavioral, cultural and social change. So by intersectionality, we broaden the categories or the factors that are included in the analysis and in our recommendations. And these three perspectives are enacted and understood within the project through a final component, which is the management of different disciplinary and epistemic perspectives. So, for example, it includes the tension between strands or models that focus on behavioral change as individuals or the individual behavioral change, which are usually mostly based on economic or psychological approaches, and on the other, focusing on social practice models and change, which are mostly based on different sociological approaches. Now, in terms of methodology, Accting, Accting is based on research, co-creation, solutions, and outcomes. So it's a 4-step methodology. It is also based on innovation and design-driven thinking, which means that this process runs in the 4 steps, and we do this in 2 cycles. So to produce results relatively fast, we do the analysis and we promote the results after the end of each of the 2 cycles. So the research step has consisted of a mapping of local bottom-up initiatives. We've mapped about 700 local bottom-up initiatives to see how people organize and take action in order to reduce or mitigate inequalities in relation to the Green Deal. We've also developed 8 interdisciplinary research lines, each addressing a Green Deal policy area. And these research lines consist of research and experimentation. And in total is 40 of these studies in 13 countries. The creativity step identifies directions for solutions that the problems that research identified. So research identifies problems, co-creation and creativity identifies directions for solutions. The solution step develops these directions for solutions and implements them as concrete outputs for policymakers and other stakeholders. And then finally, the outcome step disseminates the results and engages in outreach activities to ensure that the project work that we do is being picked up, both in terms of new knowledge by the academic community, but also in the policy community by policymakers. And this methodology is specifically designed to build bridges between the research lines, between each of these 8 lines that address a specific Green Deal policy area and the inequalities that are being produced or reproduced within that Green Deal policy area. In addition to the mapping that I mentioned, we've conducted narrative interviews with marginalized groups in 13 countries, approximately 400, or exactly 400 interviews actually. We've done 40 experimental studies and implemented case studies within these experimental studies. So we have a total of about 80 cases that we are exploring. We started by identifying the vulnerability factors that were relevant through literature studies and desk research. And then we identified the motivations or drivers and the obstacles for behavioral change via interviews. And then through the case studies, we try and explain behavioral change. Now I'm going to say something about the 3 main categories of findings from our projects, and they relate to resources, structural conditions, and social dynamics. And the next 3 slides that I'm going to show you will be of 2 bar charts per slide. So the first slide has 2 bar charts, the second slide has 2 bar charts, and the third slide has 2 bar charts. These are very difficult to see what they say, but I will talk us through them so that you know the points that I want to make. The first set of bar charts shows the main enablers and main obstacles for behavioral change in terms of resources for each of the 8 research lines. And it shows how the main enabler in terms of resources include knowledge, education, and self-efficacy, So that is an individual's belief in their own capacity to act in ways necessary to achieve the specific goal. It also shows that the main obstacle is money and time. The next set of bar charts show social dynamics, again within the same 8 research lines, and the main enablers and the main obstacles. So in terms of social dynamics, the main enabler for behavioral change is the community and its values. The main obstacle in terms of social dynamics are a bit mixed, but it includes social relationships and again the community. So here we see the community and the importance of community and social relationships as both enablers and obstacles. Now the last slide with bar charts show the structural conditions. Again, first the enablers and then the obstacles. The main enabler in relation to structural conditions is geography. It's where people live and the infrastructure in that location. The main obstacles, however, are social and economic conditions. To summarize these findings, without boring you with bar charts, is that the social dynamics is a crucial enabler for change across the inequality groups that we have interviewed. In terms of structural conditions, the predominant obstacles for change are found there in the structural conditions. And individual resources and social dynamics are important enablers, but also sometimes hindrances. So in conclusion here, change is clearly difficult and complex for anyone who is socially vulnerable or marginalized. And there's a strong tension between being ecologically sustainable and being socioeconomically disadvantaged. So what do we need to do to facilitate behavioral change without increasing inequalities? We need to improve conditions by creating policies that provide targeted financial support and incentives, including for marginalized groups. We need to address the lack of access to basic infrastructure, including from an intersectional perspective. We need to shift responsibility from individuals to manufacturers. We need to increase knowledge by first providing education programs that enable the adoption of environmentally friendly behaviors. And we need to increase knowledge by developing training, networking opportunities, and mentorship programs to support change. And in terms of leveraging the power of social dynamics with policy, we need to take action that fosters social connections and support networks, promote environmentally friendly behaviors through role models. And we need to valorize and invite existing, often indigenous and local knowledge to participate in the planning and in policy decisions. To say something about the knowledge gaps that we are still fighting with in our project, there is a lack of intersectional data and intersectional analysis. We need to find a way to collect data to discover the impact on people's ability and capacity for behavioral change, including for various marginalized groups. Consumption, we need to understand how we can unfacilitate overconsumption, and here we need to address the privilege. We do not need to keep doing this research on the marginalized, but actually on the privileged groups. We need to address norm change and masculinities. We need to investigate enablers and obstacles and how to transform them. We need to look at the role of authorities and legislation and research trust and the role of legislation among marginalized groups. And we need intergenerational and cross-cultural dialogue. We need to research the potential of exchange across cultural backgrounds and generations. And then my final slide tells you who I am, where I am, and how to subscribe to our newsletters and to our information via X or LinkedIn. And if you want to use our data or our research or our recommendations, you can find them on the Accting community on Zenodo, www.zenodo.org. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sophia Street, for showing us tools to facilitate behavioral change, but taking into account of elements like intersectionality, intergenerational dialogue, and cross-cultural exchanges. Now I will give the floor to the last speaker of the day, Anna Spitzer, that will present GreenTeens using motive alignment to engage youth in pro-environmental behavior across cultures. The floor is yours, and thank you.
Thanks. And also thank you to everyone who's already presented and everyone who's here. I've been really enjoying these presentations, and I also think that was a nice transition. So I hope that I can build off of the last presentation. Are you seeing my screen now?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So to briefly introduce myself, my name is Jenna. I am a 29-year-old woman with curly brown hair, though right now it's up in a bun. And I'm currently working on my PhD in developmental psychology at Utrecht University in the Netherlands, though I am originally from the United States. And in today's presentation, I'll be talking with you about GreenTeens, which is an ERC-funded research program in which we are evaluating whether motive alignment techniques can engage youth in pro-environmental behavior across cultures. So maybe we're going a bit more specifically into the behavior change interventions that we just heard about, and also talking about the cross-cultural validity or use of these methods. Briefly, an overview of the presentation. I will speak a bit about the motivation for the research program overall, so the theoretical model we have in mind, and then I'll go into an example, one field experiment that I'm working on, where we are also testing these ideas across cultures, and I'll reflect a bit on what that has taught me so far. Just to create a broader motivation, why are we having this conversation? I work in developmental psychology, and not very much developmental psychology research focuses on climate change. So the title of this slide is just "Climate Change is a Problem," because in a lot of contexts, the professionals I work with aren't thinking so much about climate change and sustainability transitions. And I've included 3 images of news articles with different headlines just to give a sense of how prominent our awareness of climate change is in general in the media. So we need to do something about it. And from a psychological perspective, it's also very interesting to appreciate the human behavior that's creating the problem. So maybe psychology can also contribute to finding some solutions. But the research program that I work on, GreenTeens, also focuses on young people. So this slide is saying, why are we focusing on adolescents? When we say adolescents, we're typically talking about young people from around the age of 12, maybe 10 to 12, when they go through puberty with a hormonal change, to, depending on your culture, maybe it's 16, maybe it's 18, maybe it's 20, 25. So the end of adolescence is a bit more variable, depending on your culture and historical context. But we are focusing on adolescents for many reasons. One reason is that we know young people are concerned. So on this slide, I'm showing an image of protests from 2019, along with some recent research findings that 75% of young people think the future is frightening, 84% say that they're at least moderately worried, and 45% experience feelings that negatively impact daily functioning, according to a recent article with 10,000 young people from 10 different countries around the world. So we know young people are concerned, but we also know that young people are not necessarily taking more action. So here I'm showing a graph that shows a dip in pro-environmental behavior around adolescence. And this is not to blame adolescents. This is just to say we're talking about adolescents because we know they're concerned. We know that it's their future. And we also see a real opportunity to engage young people in more behaviors that hopefully will lead to a better future for them and many generations to come. So this is the idea that adolescents can be catalysts of a sustainability transition for these reasons that I've just mentioned. I have an image of, putting out the fire. But then the question is, how can we engage young people in these transitions? And the goal is to harness rather than fight against adolescents' motives. So with an awareness of what young people are very interested in and motivated to care about. We know that young people care about autonomy and peer status. We're trying to create a path for them to move on in which sustainability, pro-environmental behaviors are on the way to realizing goals that they have in their day-to-day lives, to make these behaviors more relevant, more salient in the here and now. So instead of thinking about climate change as something in the future that's only relevant in the pretty distal reality, we're trying to bring it into their present. So here's the overall idea behind sustainability motive alignment, that adolescents can be agents of sustainable change if they view sustainability as aligned with their core motives for autonomy and status. For instance, as ways to stand up to unjust behaviors, to earn respect from their peers, and to make a positive difference in the world. So this is both an uplifting promise and a testable hypothesis. So I'll very briefly say something about a particular research experiment we've been working on, in which we are testing motive alignment through an educational intervention in secondary schools. On the left-hand side, there's an image of the globe with countries that are included in a meta-analysis on the efficacy of environmental education. So all of the countries that are darker were represented, demonstrating that environmental education is quite common around the world. And on the right, you see a bar chart showing the impact of environmental education on attitudes and knowledge and behavior. And it's just to say that it could be more impactful on behavior than it is. So we're trying to integrate motive alignment techniques into an environmental education intervention. And what did it look like? I have two different versions of the same intervention materials, and they are in Dutch. So the idea is not that anyone is reading this, but just to show you that they look the same. But perhaps you can get the impression that on the left-hand side in our control condition, we gave more traditional materials. What is climate change? What can we do about it? And we showed images of the causes and consequences of climate change. These were based off of more traditional environmental education materials. And on the right-hand side, we showed images of young people standing up, being on the podium, having their voices heard, picking up plastic bottles from a beach, really making a difference. And we showed also dynamic change. So rather than showing a graph of CO2 outputs, we showed a graph of how many young people are getting involved to do something about the climate crisis. And our question was, what do they do after they've been exposed to these different forms of environmental education materials? And so we wanted to observe real world action. So we said, thanks so much for participating and giving us feedback on these materials. Now you can have a coupon for a free snack. And then we actually were able to match up who selected which snack based off of which environmental education intervention they received. And in order to differentiate their snack options, they had eco labels. So we gave them an option for a snack with an eco impact A or a snack with an eco impact D. And the question was, who was motivated to select the eco impact A option using their little snack coupon? So that was completely by chance. Did they come to the food stand? We can't make them do it, right? They can't know that it's part of the study. So we also wanted to be a bit more sure that at follow-up, we would get a measure of behavior. And then we asked a question about donation. We're paying you some bit for participating. We're going to offer you another few euros. Would you like to donate any of that to an environmental organization instead? So those were our behavior measures. And this was just a big overview of all of the measurement waves. So we had baseline measurement, who's in our sample. A few weeks later, we did the intervention, observed their behavior at a food stand, went back 4 to 6 weeks later, got the donation and another food stand measure. So very briefly, I think I might have skipped the results slide, but that's great because I don't even have much time. But I can say what's really exciting is that we have some preliminary evidence that these interventions were more effective than the traditional educational materials at facilitating or encouraging pro-environmental behavior, both in the short term and longer term. So short term at the food stand, longer term, both groups improved at the food stand, and there was no longer a meaningful difference between groups, but only our mode of alignment group, we found more donation in our mode of alignment group. So it seems like we have a more promising approach. And what's ongoing now is a cross-cultural extension. So we are currently collecting data, as you can see on the slide here, in China, and the data are not yet in. I can't say anything about the results because we still haven't done our follow-up measure. But here you can see some research assistants behind the food stand getting ready to go. And then on the right-hand side, you see the students showing up and making their choices. And so I just wanted to reflect a little bit, what have we learned? I would say one takeaway is that mode of alignment seems to be promising, but we've only tested it in a field experiment in one culture. But what we've also really learned is how to facilitate mode of alignment across cultures. So something I haven't said much about is the piloting that went into this study, because we knew the whole time we wanted to run this intervention in both the Netherlands and in China. So then the question is, will the materials work on the same psychological mechanism in different cultural contexts? So we piloted different versions of educational materials and ended up finding a form of mode of alignment that seemed to be effective in both cultures. But we were actually prepared to select different materials, different educational materials in China, if we had evidence that those educational materials had the same underlying psychological effect as our materials in the Netherlands. Because what was most important to us was to facilitate mode of alignment rather than to use the same words. So that was very interesting to learn about. And yeah, something to keep in mind, I think, when trying to take an approach to behavior change from one context to another. And something that is coming up next is data collection in China. We have one more wave of data to get, and also possibly in Brazil. And something that we also are really looking forward to doing is taking advantage of our baseline measurements of all sorts of personal and more cultural and social variables that might moderate the impact of the educational intervention. So we measured things like loyalty to authority. We measured things like brand sensitivity. We measured things like social perceptions of social norms, such that if we find cultural differences, it might be easier to understand why these materials would work more or less well in certain environments. Something we also have is the qualitative feedback from the educational materials themselves. Students wrote down their ideas about what behaviors they were excited to engage in. So we can also learn directly from what students wrote down. And if I'm to share a take-home message, then I would say if we want to engage young people across cultures in pro-environmental behavior, we need to speak to them in their own language. And that applies both to moving an intervention from one place to another, but also to mode of alignment overall. It's saying, here are the motives that we can understand you have. We can speak to those motives. We can tap into what you care about, and then work with you to promote behaviors that might otherwise seem new or foreign. I'd like to thank the GreenTeens group that I'm working with, of course, the ERC for the funding. Our website, I'm not sure how up to date it is, but it is greenteens.sites.uu.nl. And thank you to everyone in the audience for being here. And my contact information is also on the slide with my email. So I will send it back to you, Chiara.
Thank you so much for your presentation and for reminding us the importance of being cultural aware when organizing events, but also when organizing research, which is essential in conducting research, for example, in the green transition. So now I want to thank all the speakers for their presentation and leave a few minutes for the audience to ask you questions. For people joining, you can ask questions raising your hand or writing your question in the chat. So I will give a few seconds to think about questions. Okay, I will give more seconds, but I have a curiosity for Jana Spitzer. When you were talking, I was really interested in your your research, and in GreenSCENT, what we are trying to work on is also how to consider climate anxiety among young people. So I wanted to know if in your research you're also considering that element, and how. In the meantime,
yeah.
audience, you have time to think about questions.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I'm really actually very excited to say that yesterday we received news that a project we're working on that's focused explicitly on climate anxiety was accepted for publication, so I can share that easily with you. But really the question there was about this dynamic between anxiety and behavior, because there is an idea that, maybe anxiety is motivating up to a point, and then it starts to become paralyzing, or, what is the role of anxiety? And so I guess what I can say to that is we actually found that my main takeaway is that anxiety is not such an important factor for pro-environmental behavior. We did find an association, but it's not the primary or most central way of engaging young people. And we know that there are mental health costs. So I think that what I'm learning increasingly from the research that's out there and the research that we're doing ourselves is that there can be ways of speaking about climate change that are motivating and do not need to, that are more supportive of young people's mental health. And at the same time, should young people experience climate anxiety, we can also tell them that it is possible to view that as a really understandable and helpful response to motivate action. So we know that we can put it to use, but at the same time that we don't need to view anxiety and doom and gloom messaging as, the way to motivate behavior. So I find that helpful. I don't know if that's a clear answer though.
Yes, thank you for your answer.
And may I add something?
Sure.
Oh, thank you. No, it sort of resonates, or potentially resonates, with what we found in Accting about social dynamics, that it's so much about, to facilitate behavioral change, it's not sitting on the individual level, it's sitting on the relationship level and the community level. So the more, the more grounded, the more networked you are in the social relationships and on the community level, the more likely you are to enable behavioral change. So this could potentially mitigate the individual anxiety if there's a close community connection.
Thank you, Sophia. Any other questions or comments or ideas that you want to share? Yes, Estela.
Hi, thanks, Chiara. Thanks all speakers for all the interesting presentations. It's really a lot of food for thought. My question to all of you, or whoever wants to answer it, is how limiting is for you to have a project restricted to a period of time? So because behavioral changes are not in a 3 years scale. So how do you think this limits your research?
Well, I can say something about that. Working on a funded project that, you know, has a clear start and end date, and I'm one of two PhD candidates working on it. And I have one more year left, and it's honestly something that's on my mind a lot, because I feel like we've been learning about mode of alignment, we've been developing new materials, and in a year, the project is sort of over. And I really wonder what will happen with the knowledge that we've developed, because there isn't a clear funding for the follow-up studies, but there would be clear research questions and next steps. So it's not necessarily to say that I feel like within this period of time, we can't answer our primary research questions, but I do see how the time bound puts an end, a kind of arbitrary end, to the development of those ideas beyond what we've learned and can learn in a 4-year window, 4 or 5 year window. So I guess that's a reality of academia. I'm not sure what the right partnerships would be, right? If there's something that's more policy oriented, who could pick it up from here? I just don't have answers.
I think that this is a much bigger problem in a way, with the whole funding system and the projectification of knowledge in the way that we've seen it moving. And I mean, the controversial but simple solution is base funding, straight from the funders to the universities, to the research organizations, which would provide stable funding throughout the lifetime of, you know, academia. But it doesn't work that way because of the ideas of excellence, which, you know, to be frank, can be quite much bollock. But so I think it's a much bigger issue than just for behavioral change. It has to do with the whole projectification and new public management and the shift in research. To end on a depressing note.
Thank you for your answer, and to Estela for the question. We are running a little bit late, so I'm going to thank you all again for joining this webinar. I personally learned a lot. I have this image of the food, of thinking about how we portray food, that Katarina brought to this space. Actually, it was surprising the importance of actually think about the representation of food to make our content more accessible. And I personally learned a lot, and I hope it was the same for all of you. Just a reminder, we will share this this recording on our YouTube page, GreenSCENT, but I will also share the recording to all the participants so that you can have access to all the information. In Acting, research lines address food. Please check it out. We will. We will. And so thank you again for everything. And we have this tradition that if you want to follow, you are welcome to follow, to write on the chat, do a chat storming. So sharing the chat, how you have experienced this webinar. And as a sort of song or poetry, I will read through the comments while you are leaving the webinar. This is our tradition. We didn't change so far. Hope you like it. And thank you again for everything. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you to the assistant of Marina, that was, you couldn't see, but she helped us a lot technically. And thank you to my Transmedia Catalonia team. And I hope to see you all in different events. And now I will start reading through the comments. Thank you for the presentations, food for thought. Thank you for organizing this event, and thank you for all your talks and interesting input. It was very interesting. I learned a lot. Thank you for organizing such an interesting session. So with all these thanks, thank you. I close the session, and see you.
GreenSCENT logo, Smart Citizen Education for a Green Future. This project has received funding from the European Union's Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Programme under Grant Agreement number 1010364880. European flag.